What if the biggest clue to the future of artificial intelligence is not hidden in a lab, but buried in the deep past of worms, fish, mammals, primates, and the long, improbable road that led to the human mind? That is the question driving Max Bennett's A Brief History of Intelligence, and it gives the book immediate stakes. Bennett's central claim is bold but elegantly simple. Human intelligence did not arrive in one miraculous leap, and it did not emerge from one magical brain region. Instead, it was assembled across evolutionary time through a series of major breakthroughs, each one opening a new way for life to learn from the world. And that idea matters far beyond biology. If you care about why modern AI can sometimes look brilliant and sometimes look laughably incomplete, this book offers a fresh lens. And if you are here because you want to keep building your own self-development through ideas from some of the world's most important authors, take a second to like, share, and comment on this video because it helps this kind of thoughtful work keep reaching the people who are hungry for it. Bennett is unusually well-placed to tell this story. Public biographies describe him as an AI entrepreneur and researcher, the co-founder of Bluecore, later the CEO of Albi, and a writer who has also published scientific papers on evolutionary neuroscience and intelligence. That mixed background explains why the book feels so different from a standard popular science title. It is not just a history of brains. It is also a test of modern AI through the lens of evolution. Bennett keeps asking a deceptively powerful question. If machines still fall short of human-like intelligence in key ways, what if the missing pieces are the very same breakthroughs that biology had to discover over hundreds of millions of years? So, from the first pages, the book is working in two directions at once. It looks backward to explain how minds emerged, and it looks forward to ask what that history means for the future of artificial intelligence. If that already clicks with you, type "I see the pattern" in the comments. Because this book is really about one hidden pattern after another suddenly becoming visible. The architecture of the book is one of its great strengths. Publicly available contents show a clear progression. Bennett begins with an introduction and a chapter called The World Before Brains. Then, he moves through 5 major breakthroughs: steering in early bilaterians, reinforcing in early vertebrates, simulating in early mammals, mentalizing in early primates, and speaking in early humans. Under those broad movements, he adds chapters on the birth of good and bad, the origin of emotion, temporal difference learning, pattern recognition, curiosity, map-like world models, the neocortex, theory of mind, observational learning, human language, ChatGPT, and finally a conclusion called The Sixth Breakthrough. That matters because the book is not a pile of disconnected, interesting facts. It is a staircase. Each step prepares the next one. Each later ability is shown not as a total replacement of what came before, but as an addition built on top of older layers. That layered structure is what gives the summary that follows its shape, and it is also what makes Bennett's thesis so memorable. The first move Bennett makes is subtle but foundational. He refuses to say that intelligence started with brains. In interviews linked to the book, he argues that intelligence in a broad sense cannot be reduced to nervous systems alone. Even single cells can sense, adapt, solve local problems, and learn from repeated conditions in primitive ways. So the opening chapter, The World Before Brains, widens the frame before it narrows it. Life was already under pressure to track useful signals, maintain internal stability, and cope with danger long before anything like a brain existed. That choice matters because it changes the emotional tone of the whole book. Human intelligence is not presented as a cosmic exception floating above biology. It is presented as the latest elaboration in a much older struggle, the struggle of living systems to detect what matters, act effectively, and survive long enough to pass on their strategies. Bennett's history becomes more persuasive precisely because he begins with that humility. That opening sets up the first real breakthrough in Bennett's framework, steering. He places this shift in early bilaterians, and the core idea is beautifully simple. A creature begins to divide the world into things worth approaching and things worth escaping. Bennett defines steering as the ability to classify stimuli by valence, positive or negative, and then turn accordingly. That may sound basic, but he treats it as revolutionary, because once an organism can reliably orient itself in relation to good and bad, its behavior stops being merely a bundle of reflexes. It becomes a primitive strategy. The creature can exploit food patches more effectively, avoid danger more reliably, and integrate what is happening outside its body with what is happening inside it. Bennett's scientific work also links this first breakthrough to physical changes, such as bilateral body plans, early central integration, associative plasticity, and neuromodulatory systems that generate persistent behavioral states. In other words, the first mind-like systems do not start with abstract thought. They start with directed movement in a world that has begun to matter. Bennett then extends the first breakthrough beyond simple movement. In these early chapters, emotion is not treated as a late human luxury. It is framed as one of the oldest organizing principles in intelligence. Internal states, such as hunger, satiety, pain, and arousal, give meaning to sensory input. A smell is not just a smell, it is suddenly a possible meal, a threat, a cue, a promise, or a warning. And once stimuli can be linked with value, learning begins to take shape. A cue, repeatedly paired with pain, can become aversive. A cue paired with nourishment can become attractive. Bennett's world is one in which the earliest nervous systems are already doing three astonishing things at once: feeling, in a primitive sense, updating from experience, and changing future behavior on the basis of that update. Seen that way, the first breakthrough is not small at all. It is the birth of a mind that can be guided by what matters. There is another reason Bennett's first breakthrough is so clever. It gives emotion a deep history without reducing it to melodrama. By tracing value signals back to primitive steering, he quietly dissolves a false split that still shapes a lot of modern thinking. The idea that emotion is irrational noise and intelligence is cold computation. In Bennett's telling, that separation arrives far too late. Before an organism can reason well, it has to care in some minimal way. It has to register attraction, aversion, urgency, relief. The first glimmer of intelligence is not pure thought. It is meaningful orientation. And that makes the later human story far easier to understand. Our highest cognition was never built on a blank, emotionless platform. It was built on ancient systems of value. Breakthrough number 2 takes us into early vertebrates, and Bennett calls it reinforcing. Here, the story moves from primitive steering to trial and error learning. In his scientific framework, reinforcing maps onto model-free reinforcement learning. A vertebrate nervous system can strengthen behaviors that led to reward and suppress behaviors that led to punishment, even when the right behavior was not encoded in advance. This is where the basal ganglia, dopamine, timing, and reward prediction become central. Bennett's claim is that this breakthrough allowed animals not just to turn toward the good and away from the bad, but to discover which arbitrary actions improved outcomes over time. The world no longer had to be navigated only through direct valence gradients. It could be navigated through learned action policies. A fish or other early vertebrate could do something, get feedback, update, and become more effective on the next attempt. That may sound obvious because we live inside learning systems ourselves, But Bennett's point is precisely that it had to evolve. Trial and error intelligence was itself a historic achievement. But Bennett does not leave reinforcement at the level of crude reward chasing. Public summaries and chapter titles show him pushing further into interval timing, omission learning, pattern recognition, curiosity, and the first model of the world. That is important, because reinforcement only becomes powerful when the organism can tell one type of situation from another. Keep track of when outcomes should happen, notice when expected events fail to occur, and explore rather than merely repeat old behaviors. Bennett's associated psychology paper links early vertebrates not only to reinforcement, but to map-based navigation and timing abilities as well. That turns the vertebrate mind into something much richer than a stimulus-response machine. It begins to model space, sequence, and possibility in a more stable way. Across these chapters, the book shows that intelligence grows not merely by adding more reward, but by improving the structure around reward, recognizing patterns, tracking time, building spatial models, and using curiosity to prevent learning from collapsing into self-defeating repetition. Bennett also uses the vertebrate section to show how much AI and neuroscience have already influenced one another. Reinforcement learning did not simply borrow a metaphor from biology and move on. It kept circling back toward biological questions. Dopamine research sharpened machine learning concepts, and machine learning concepts helped clarify what reward prediction systems in brains might actually be doing. That two-way story matters because it stops the reader from imagining AI as a detached rival to biological intelligence. In Bennett's framing, AI is also a tool for revealing what animal intelligence has been doing all along. When computational models work, they illuminate old brain functions. When they fail, they expose what evolution had already solved in ways we still do not fully understand. One of the hidden strengths of this second breakthrough is what it says about us. Bennett is quietly reminding the reader that much of what humans later romanticize as intelligence began in ancient feedback loops. You try. The world answers. Your nervous system updates. That logic still lives in us. Habit, training, craving, avoidance, discipline, addiction, reward, and a great deal of what feels like just the way I am still carry the signature of very old vertebrate machinery. Bennett never uses that point to diminish humanity. If anything, he uses it to show how layered we are. The human being is not someone who escaped older learning systems. The human being is someone who still contains them, still depends on them, and only later builds more reflective capacities on top. That is one of the most grounding effects of the book. It makes intelligence feel embodied, historical, and close to daily life. Then, the book reaches the breakthrough that gives the whole framework its most dramatic turn, simulating in early mammals. In Bennett's model, this is where the neocortex changes the game. Instead of learning only from actions actually taken, the animal can begin to play out possible actions internally before committing to one. Public summaries of Bennett's work connect this shift to model-based reinforcement learning, vicarious trial and error, episodic memory, and counterfactual learning. That matters because trial and error is expensive. If every lesson requires the organism to pay in real danger, real energy, or real time, learning remains painfully slow. But once a nervous system can simulate possibilities internally, a new kind of intelligence enters the story. A mammal can pause, compare routes, replay scenes, and weigh options before acting. This is the moment where intelligence begins to look recognizably imaginative. Bennett's account of the neocortex is not that it simply made animals smarter in some vague sense. It made them able to run a kind of internal theater. This breakthrough also transforms memory. Memory stops being only a way to strengthen or weaken future reactions. It becomes material for replay, reconstruction, and alternative scenarios. Bennett's public research summaries explicitly connect early mammals with episodic memory and counterfactual learning. A mammal can, in some limited but meaningful sense, revisit what happened, compare it to what might have happened, and let the difference matter. Regret, rehearsal, hesitation, and strategic caution all become easier to understand through this lens. They are not detached philosophical luxuries. They are outgrowths of an evolutionary engineering breakthrough, the capacity to learn from imagined actions, not just actual ones. That helps explain why mammals can often navigate uncertainty so much better than systems built only on direct conditioning. Bennett's argument here is one of the most persuasive in the whole book, because it explains why consciousness-like behavior can intensify long before language appears. A mind that can simulate is already living in more than one reality at once. Breakthrough number 4 makes the story unmistakably social. Bennett calls it mentalizing and places it in early primates. In his neuroanatomy paper, he defines mentalizing as constructing a model of the mind itself, including intention and knowledge. That is a major escalation. The brain is no longer only modeling the external world. It is modeling agents within that world, including itself as a future agent. The chapter, The Arms Race for Political Savvy, gives away Bennett's evolutionary framing. Primates did not simply get smarter in a vacuum. They were pushed by life in social worlds dense with alliances, status competition, deception, imitation, parenting, cooperation, and rivalry. A food source is one kind of problem. A troop full of strategic minds is another. And it is in that social furnace, Bennett argues, that the next major breakthrough emerges. Intelligence becomes not merely a way of coping with the environment, but a way of coping with other minds who are also coping with you. That last point is one of Bennett's most memorable distinctions. In his research and interviews, he contrasts ordinary planning with the ability to act for a future need that is not currently active. Going to the fridge while hungry is one thing. Buying food for tomorrow while not hungry is another. Bennett surveys evidence that many primates can anticipate future needs in ways that non-primate mammals often cannot. He also links mentalizing to observational learning, which is where the chapter Monkey Hammers and Self-Driving Cars becomes so revealing. The primate does not merely copy visible motion. It can often infer some part of the intention behind that motion. That matters because raw mimicry is brittle. Goal understanding is flexible. If I understand what you are trying to do, I can adapt your action to a new context. Bennett uses that bridge to connect primate cognition with ideas in AI, such as inverse reinforcement learning, where the system tries to infer the hidden objective behind observed behavior, rather than merely copying the surface pattern. There is also a fascinating implication inside the mentalizing breakthrough that reaches beyond primates and into modern ethics. In interviews, Bennett notes that minds able to model the intentions of others are better positioned, not just for cooperation, but for interpreting ambiguous instructions. That has obvious relevance for AI alignment. Humans routinely leave crucial things unsaid because we assume other humans will infer our intent. We do not specify every boundary of a request. We trust another mind to read between the lines. But a system that lacks any robust analog of mentalizing can satisfy literal instructions while completely missing the human meaning behind them. So when Bennett discusses theory of mind, observational learning, and future needs planning, he is also laying groundwork for why machine safety may require more than bigger language models. It may require systems that can infer what we actually mean, not merely what we happen to say. If that shift is landing with you, Here is the second commitment I want to weave naturally into the flow of this summary. Type "I choose the long view" in the comments. Because Bennett's whole framework rewards long view thinking. He wants you to stop asking only what the brain is doing now, and start asking what capacities accumulated across time, what pressures shaped them, and what older layers still remain active beneath modern consciousness. That long view also changes what intelligence means. A smarter species is not only one that computes more in isolation. It is one that can borrow computation from others. Primates move strongly in that direction. Skills spread through observation. Tool use diffuses. Young individuals benefit from discoveries they did not personally pay for. A group becomes a reservoir of distributed intelligence. Bennett's work highlights evidence that non-human primates can learn motor skills through observation in a richer way than many non-primate vertebrates. And that matters because it forms the bridge to what humans later make explosive through language, teaching, culture, and cumulative knowledge. Then, we reach the fifth breakthrough, which Bennett calls speaking in early humans. Public chapter listings show this final section, unfolding through the search for human uniqueness, language in the brain, the perfect storm, and ChatGPT and the window into the mind. This is where his model becomes most familiar and most surprising. Familiar, because language is the obvious place where humans seem to separate most dramatically from other animals. Surprising, because Bennett refuses the easiest explanation. In public extracts and related materials, he argues that the classic language areas alone cannot explain the whole difference, because homologous regions exist in other primates. So, the human leap is not simply, we got one special language spot and they did not. Bennett's framework points instead toward more subtle changes in connectivity and learning conditions. Human uniqueness is not denied, but it is made more demanding. If language truly is the decisive breakthrough, then we have to ask not only what words are, but what new kind of mind and what new kind of inheritance words make possible. Anatomy, however, is only part of the story. Bennett's psychology paper highlights developmental ingredients such as joint attention and proto-conversations. Human infants, long before full language, engage in rhythmic back-and-forth exchanges with caregivers. They share attention toward objects. They participate in tiny nonverbal structures that look like the training round of language. Bennett treats these not as charming extras, but as clues. In public extracts, he even suggests that language may depend not only on cortical capacity, but on a kind of built-in learning curriculum. Instincts that bias babies toward turn-taking, shared attention, and communicative exchange. That matters, because it reframes language as something more than vocabulary and grammar. It becomes a socially guided developmental achievement, supported by specific neural connectivity and by patterns of interaction that other primates do not show in the same way. So when Bennett searches for human uniqueness, he does not find one mystical switch. He finds a convergence of anatomy, development, sociality, and inherited readiness to learn. The language section has another payoff that is easy to miss if you only focus on grammar. Bennett's framework makes language feel less like a communication tool and more like a civilization engine. Once one brain can upload a useful simulation into another brain, a new kind of inheritance begins. Children no longer rely only on genes and direct trial and error. They inherit maps, warnings, rituals, techniques, and stories. Groups can coordinate around events that are distant in space and time. Plans can be refined before anyone acts. Mistakes can be transmitted as lessons rather than repeated as accidents. That is why Bennett's interview language about new sources of learning is so powerful. Language is not merely a better sound system. It is the opening of a channel for which one individual's imagined outcomes can become part of another individual's usable world model. Culture, in that sense, is not decoration layered on top of intelligence. It is intelligence escaping the boundary of one skull. One particularly elegant detail in Bennett's scientific framing is the link between language and music. He suggests that the same human innovations that enable hierarchical, rhythmic, predictive communication may also underwrite our unusual musical capacities. That is why music appears inside the fifth breakthrough rather than as a decorative afterthought. Both language and music depend on timing, turn-taking, nested structure, and anticipation. Both allow shared patterns to exist outside any single mind. Bennett's point is not that music and language are identical. It is that both may express the same deep human upgrade, an ability to coordinate meaning and rhythm across brains with extraordinary flexibility. It is one more reminder that the human breakthrough is larger than vocabulary alone. It is about the social orchestration of minds. And once language exists, the scale changes. In interviews around the book, Bennett describes the 5 breakthroughs as successive expansions in where learning can come from. Vertebrates learn from their own actual actions. Mammals add learning from their own imagined actions. Primates add learning from other people's actual actions through intention reading. Language then adds something truly explosive, learning from other people's imagined actions and remembered experiences. When one mind can transmit its internal simulation to another, culture becomes possible at a depth and speed no earlier species could match. This is why the chapter title, The Perfect Storm, feels so right. Language did not just make us chatty. It allowed cumulative culture, explicit teaching, complex coordination, symbolic memory, and the widening spiral of shared knowledge that eventually produced everything from myths to mathematics. Bennett's evolutionary narrative becomes, at that point, a history not just of brains, but of civilization. This is also why Bennett's modern chapter, ChatGPT and the Window into the Mind, feels earned rather than trendy. Public descriptions and reviews make clear that he sees large language models as both astonishing and revealing. They show how far language-like prediction can go. But they also reveal what may still be missing. An Associated Press review of the book highlights Bennett's point that systems like ChatGPT do not learn sequentially in the human sense. They are trained on huge corpora and then largely stop learning in order to avoid catastrophic interference and instability. In Bennett's broader framework, that matters because human-like intelligence depends on layered capacities that include continual adaptation, embodied interaction, internal simulation, social inference, and more than surface fluency. So Bennett uses current AI not as a cheap villain or a naive triumph, but as a diagnostic instrument. When AI succeeds, we learn something about what intelligence can be formalized. When it fails, we learn something about which inherited biological breakthroughs we still do not understand well enough to replicate. That naturally leads to the conclusion, the 6th breakthrough. Public discussion of the book suggests Bennett ends by asking whether the next major turning point in the history of intelligence will be artificial rather than biological. But he does not seem to ask that in a simplistic, triumphalist register. The question is not only whether we can build more powerful systems. The question is whether we understand intelligence well enough to guide what we are building. That is a very different moral atmosphere. By the time Bennett reaches this conclusion, he has already shown that intelligence is not the same as performance on a benchmark, not the same as language fluency alone, and not the same as one clean function located in one clean brain region. Intelligence is layered, embodied, emotional, social, predictive, and historical. So the 6th breakthrough, if it comes, will not be meaningful merely because it is new. It will matter because it will inherit, distort, or extend the entire long story that came before it. Bennett's conclusion seems to leave the reader with awe, but also with responsibility. And this is where the book becomes unexpectedly relevant to self-development as well. Bennett is writing about evolutionary neuroscience and AI. But the hidden personal message is that growth still follows the same layered logic. You cannot think clearly if you ignore valence, habit, and reinforcement. You cannot plan well without simulation. You cannot build mature relationships without mentalizing. You cannot extend your potential without language, teaching, and participation in culture. In that sense, Bennett's framework is not only explanatory, it is diagnostic. It suggests that when people struggle to grow, they are often fighting one layer while pretending only the top layer matters. Real development means respecting the stack. So, what is the deepest takeaway of A Brief History of Intelligence? It is that intelligence is cumulative, layered, scaffolded, and inseparable from evolutionary problem solving. The human mind is not one thing. It is a stack of ancient achievements still operating together, steering, reinforcing, simulating, mentalizing, speaking. We still carry the ancient need to orient toward what feels good and away from what feels bad. We still learn through reward and punishment. We still simulate futures. We still infer intentions. And then, on top of all that, we speak, teach, coordinate, and build worlds of culture. Bennett's genius is that he does not flatten those layers into one slogan. He lets them remain distinct enough to explain why different animals can be brilliant in different ways, why machines can surpass us in narrow domains while failing in ordinary ones, and why the human story is extraordinary without being detached from the rest of life. Reviewers have noted that the book can be dense, especially in its earlier scientific sections. And that is worth saying out loud, because it helps explain why the book is so effective when it lands. Bennett is not offering empty inspiration dressed up as science. He is willing to spend time on anatomy, learning theory, comparative evidence, and the awkward complexity of brains that evolved by patchwork rather than clean design. The payoff is that when he finally turns to ChatGPT, dishwashing robots, observational learning, or human uniqueness, those ideas do not feel like TED Talk flourishes. They feel grounded. The argument has weight because the scaffolding under it is real. My own sense is that the book matters because it restores patience to a conversation that is usually too shallow or too hysterical. Bennett gives you a way to admire AI without exaggerating it, respect animal minds without flattening every difference, and respect human uniqueness without turning it into mythology. He offers a model, not a dogma, and that humility is one of the book's strengths. It invites better questions. Not, what magic thing makes humans smart? But, what new learning channel became possible at each major evolutionary step? Not, which species is highest? But, what problems selected for which capacities? Not, can AI already think like us? But, which breakthroughs has it approximated and which ones remain missing? That is the kind of reframing that stays with you long after the details fade. There is also a quieter emotional effect beneath the whole book. Bennett's story makes intelligence feel less like a medal and more like a responsibility. If our minds are the temporary leading edge of a process hundreds of millions of years in the making, then intelligence is not only something we have. It is something we inherit, extend, and potentially misuse. That idea lands with real force by the end. Because once you stop seeing intelligence as a static noun and start seeing it as a fragile sequence of breakthroughs, you also stop taking the future for granted. The next step is not guaranteed to be wise simply because it is powerful. And that is part of what leaves the reader not only informed, but sobered in the best possible way. And if this summary gave you something useful, something clarifying, or simply a better question to carry into the rest of your day, do not let the insight stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who loves big ideas, and drop a comment with the line, "I see the pattern," or "I choose the long view." That small act helps build the kind of audience that wants more substance and less noise, and it helps this ongoing series keep bringing the world's strongest books into practical focus. In the end, A Brief History of Intelligence leaves us with a vision that is at once humbling and energizing. Intelligence is not a single spark. It is a history of openings, a sequence of new ways to sense, learn, imagine, coordinate, and become. The question hanging over us now is whether the next opening will deepen understanding or merely amplify power without wisdom. That is why this book matters. It does not just explain where the mind came from. It asks what kind of future mind we are about to help create. If this summary helped you see the whole architecture of Bennett's argument more clearly, don't forget to like, share, and comment before you go. And if you want to keep exploring transformative ideas from remarkable books with a community that actually likes thinking slowly and deeply, stay close. See you in the next summary.